My name is Shannon Douglas. I've been studying tarot for more than 20 years, and I've been studying that as a curiosity and as a discipline and as a mystery to me. And even 20 years later, with ongoing study, I still find new things in tarot all the time, and uncover new meanings and new circumstances, particularly when I go through something in life. Recently, for example, I came to a deeper understanding of one of the major arcana cards. Don't pay attention, or maybe pay attention to the sirens in the background, because it had to do with that card, if you know what I'm saying. These things teach us over time, and we can learn things from books, but we also learn things in our own lives about how the meanings of the cards manifest in other people's lives and the archetypes themselves. There are times when archetypes come forward in our lives and have an effect on us, or an impact on us, or an influence on us, and there are times when they step back from that influence, and in the meantime they leave us with the impression, or a clearer impression, of what they are and what they're about. And that allows us, if we are someone who does readings for other people, which I do very rarely, it allows us to give deeper and better insights. Now, I'm going to share with you today a question, or I'm going to address a question that came up in a discussion online that I was part of. And that question was about reading and studying tarot, and in particular, the court cards. And a few people said that they were considering taking the courts out of the deck when they're doing readings because they have a hard time understanding them. And I wanted to share some of my impressions with you on maybe different layers than you've read in books, because a lot of these have come from my meditation on tarot in my career and in my life over the last 20 plus years. And I don't know if I've seen them reflected in books. Now, that said, maybe I have half a dozen tarot books currently, and maybe I've read another half a dozen. I typically don't read a lot of books on tarot because I find them very superficial. And I think that tarot is a very deep study, and so I read ancillary references, things like astrology, things like numerology. I want to understand the references behind tarot. I've really appreciated the history of some of the esoteric orders, the Order of the Golden Dawn, from which we have the deck, the Rider-Waite Smith. I read the Pamela Coleman Smith deck, or study that as a reference, and that's my primary deck. I have two others. One is an antique collector's deck. It's over 100, almost 110 years old now, printed in 1910, if I'm not mistaken. And the other is an artistic deck that I don't read with at all. Now, come to think of it, I have a 78 card deck that's Kabbalah referenced, but it's not image driven, and I've maybe only turned cards on it 3 or 4 times in the 15 years that I've owned it. So today, the court cards. Earth, water, fire, and air, we've got 16 different personalities. And I would like to suggest that some insight into this might come actually from the world of business that in modern day, because I believe that the tarot was a substantial influence on Carl Jung, even though he only lectured about it a couple of times in the early 1930s. He did come up with 4 spectrums of personality, which evolved into what we know now as the Meyers-Briggs Personality Type Index, the MBTI. And there are 4 spectrums on the MBTI. The first one is introvert to extrovert. Where do we sit on the spectrums? That's starts the Myers-Briggs type with either an I or an E. Then we have intuitive or sensor. We then have thinker or thinking or feeling, and then the last one is judging or perceiving. And each of those categories or spectrums have a definition associated with them. And if we do the math on those variances, we have 16 possible personality types emerging from that. Now, I don't believe they directly correspond or correlate to the 16 court cards of tarot. As you know, Knight, Queen, Jack, or Knight, King, Queen, Jack, and Page. I don't believe that the MBTI and the 16 categories correspond directly to that. However, the 4-quadrant methodology is widespread. So an example of that is the DISC, D-I-S-C. It was created by a Harvard psychology professor named Marston. There's actually a movie out right now, Dr. Marston and the Wonder Woman, which is a mind bender a little bit on this 4-quadrant personality type. So we've got the D stands for driver or dominance. I is for influence or inducement. S is for submissive, if you take the movie seriously, or supportive, and C is for conscientiousness. And each of those represents a different personality type. Now, if you look at it, in the D, the driver, the dominance, it's a power position. It is the element of fire, very clearly, and the colors associated with it in DISC actually correspond to fiery kinds of energy. The I, the influencer, corresponds to air. It's a big, active, outgoing personality, typically extroverted. Although I's can be introverted, they're sociable, they're communicators. The S and the C get into the more grounded elements of earth and water. S being more supportive in the sort of watery category. That's where the emotions lie, and the C, the conscientiousness, is the earth, where the process and procedures lie, and feelings of accomplishment tie into results. Now, another 4-quadrant personality type indicator is True Colors. If you're aware of True Colors, there's four. There's orange, blue, green, and gold. Not necessarily in that order. Orange is the fiery temperament. Blue is the emotional temperament. Gold is the supportive. Anyway, you get the picture. You can look these up. You can do free personality type index evaluations online. You just have to look them up. MBTI or True Colors or DISC personality profile. You add free in your Google search, and you can pretty quickly come up with your dominant personality type. Now, we've got 4 elements in the tarot: earth, water, fire, and air, and they correspond to the 4 suits. Now, I read the Pamela Coleman-Smith deck, and over the years, my impression of the suits maybe has deviated, I think, quite organically and naturally in terms of how I see and experience the suits from what is traditionally taught, let's say. So I've heard lots of people say that the element of swords or the suit of swords is the element of air, and the suit of wands is the element of fire. And I see decks painted that way and presented that way, and I actually read them reversed. And I don't know if it's left-handed or right-handed, but I see the suit of swords as decisive, active. There's conflict energy, there's power in there. To me, that resonates with the fire element. And in the wands, I see them as intellect, ideas, knowledge, learning. It's the element of air to me. Now, you may read them slightly different. That's fine. That's not going to interfere with my interpretation of the courts here. Now, there are, as you know, King, Queen, Knight, and Page. I'm going to talk a little bit about energies in terms of gender here. Now, each of the elements has a gender. The swords and the wands are male gendered, and the cups and the coins are female gendered. God and goddess energies that are dispersed, and that's natural distribution. Now, all men have female energies, and all women have male energies. This isn't about our biological parts. It's about the kinds of energies that we may express and experience. So if we're considering the court cards in terms of reading, we may see a king come up, and that actually refers to a woman. I turned a card for a friend of mine a little while ago, not realizing that her mom was a well-known politician, and the King of Swords came up. And I said, there's a person of influence in your life, the way that the term came out, a person of influence in your life that has this energy. They either work in politics, in law, or in government in some capacity, in a leadership or influential position. And that's kind of how I see that energy manifesting at societal level. So I'm going to look at the microcosm. We've got the internal, that's the personality type, and how the 4 elements manifest within us. And then we've got the macrocosm, or at least a higher level, at how the elements manifest in the world at large and in different institutions and organizations. So at the macrocosm, I kind of already ran over the personality types and how I think those elements pan out for individuals. But for society at large, I look at careers or at institutions. So the element of swords, which I started with, is law. I think soldiers, I think enforcement of law, I think government, because government evolved out of the rule of law that was first held in place by police or by an armed force, a militia of some sort. And they use force in order to keep those things in line. Now, we've evolved to a point where we've internalized those consequences of negative actions, and we don't need someone with a sword, either pounding us on the head with the butt of the sword or poking us with it to maintain the laws of society. So governments and bureaucracies run by laws and systems that enforce institutional power. And this could also be courts, lawyers, anything where there's enforcement. Compliance departments in business, for example, fall under the element of, or the energy of swords. The element of air or wands to me is the academy. It's intellect, ideas, knowledge, it is science, it's innovation. There's a type of creativity there, intellectual creativity, not fertility creativity, which would be the suit of cups. And so I see anything to do with school and learning and teaching and studying and science in the domain of air or wands. When I look at institutions or organizations that have to do with cups or the element of water, I look at helping professions. So the health industry, I look at counseling, I look at religious teaching, like I would hold someone who counsels the emotions of others and supports the emotions of others in that place. So I see the King of Cups or the Queen of Cups sometimes, and to me that's either a counselor or a doctor or a priest or a spiritual person of some sort who is playing a particular role supporting the emotions of others. That leaves the element of coins. Coins, pentacles is self-explanatory. It's money. I work in the financial business in my workaday world, and sometimes I see myself as the knight of coins. I'm in charge of going out and selling and developing business and building relationships that have to do with commerce. And that active principle in the knight, that outside principle in the knight is getting out of the boundaries of the business and actually going out and starting to build some relationships. So institutions and organizations, banks, financial institutions, insurance companies, larger organizations, economy at large, yes, but when we get into economy, I start to think in more archetypal terms. So the economy is ruled, the market has always been ruled by the god Mercury, and who also oversees writing and is a messenger of the gods and is tied to the magician card as well as others. So there's a distinction between sort of the process of being in business, let's say, the economy, and the overarching energy of the economy at large. So 4 different layers to each of the courts, the page, the knight, the queen, and the king. Male principles are active, outgoing, female principles are receptive, internal, creative. And if we think in terms of biological or psychological evolution or the evolution of society, in traditional society, we're talking 50 to 150 people in a tribe or a clan or a troop, if we go back far enough in terms of evolution, women, of course, bear children. And children are, they require attention, and it's difficult to travel with children. So traditionally, women were the gatherers, historically, and historically men were the hunters. And we're biologically built differently in order to be able to do that. And we have all kinds of different systems that complement each other in terms of gender. So the yin and the yang of gender is men are outbound, working or hunting away from the home. This is not a prescription, by the way. This is real touchy territory if we're talking about modern theories of gender and feminism. And women historically are receptive and creative, and they're protecting the hearth and gathering the food and nurturing and raising the children. It's more complicated than that, but when we look at the 4 chord cards, we look at the genders, page as being principally feminine, knight being masculine, queen being feminine, king being masculine again. So page I always view as a messenger of some sort. She is close to home, and some people say the page is androgynous, and if you look at the decks in lots of cases, that's how the page is communicated. But the young page or young girl is a sort of cohesive or binding force in terms of communication within the community or within the organization. So I think of it as news or communications or running internal messages. The knight is the young, let's say, hunter who's leaving the community to go out and bring something down, or soldier, or salesperson, or priest, hasn't reached the priestly level yet, but let's say initiated monk of some sort, or student of psychology, or there's a layer of outward action and energy and connectedness at the level of knight. Sticking to the suit of coins, the knight is, as I said, I believe a salesperson. They're driving business. And they're building outward relationships and doing the day-to-day negotiations. The queen of coins is the accountant or the controller or the business manager. So if I look at a business, I've got the communication systems administration at the page level. I've got the sales level of the organization happening at the knight level. I've got the financial management and the personal business management at the queen level. And then I have the business owner, who's sometimes actually outside of the business, as the king of coins. And each of the, if you imagine in terms of industry and type of business, each of those 4 cards has a correspondence in each of the different suits and each of the different industries. So if I'm doing a reading, I'm using some of this to hone in on maybe the types of roles that we're talking about and the types of energies that are portraying themselves to me. I haven't read about this anywhere that I'm aware of. You may have, I'm not sure. And so this is how I view the 16 court cards in terms of my own study and practice. It's worthwhile, to lay out the 4 pages and have a look at them. Talk to them in terms of their energy and see what kind of response you get from that meditation. Look at the 4 queens, look at the 4 knights and see what they do. Figure out what your relationship is with the elements in a deck. Some people have different impressions like I do, and that's evolved over time. I think in my first few years of reading tarot, I was pretty convinced that the traditional presentation of swords as air and I can't even say it. My mind doesn't wrap around it. So for me, that internal representation is swords is fire and wands is air. Figure out what your real relationship is with the elements in the decks that you're reading, and then play around with it. See what comes out for you. I do a regular meditation on tarot, and years ago I actually put aside the cards. I don't carry them around with me. I don't turn them anymore. But in lots of cases, I think in tarot, especially when it comes to personality types. And when I meet people, I have a way of categorizing them that's much like the Meyers-Briggs, or much like the True Colors, or much like the disc profile. But I'm seeing or representing or categorizing people based on the energy that they present in the courts. Now, one last thing. I don't know if you ever played Crazy Eights, okay? But if you ever played Crazy Eights and you played the kind of extended version, the Queen of Spades is pickup 5, right? You don't want to land on the Queen of Spades because you end up way behind in the game, and all kids who play Crazy Eights know this. The Queen of Spades is the Queen of Swords, and when she's inverted, she can be a real piece of work. You don't want to be dealing with that inversion of the Queen of Swords. So each of these 16 personality types has an invert meaning or positive expression and a negative expression. And that's part of the undertaking of these personality types as well. I tend to see each of the 16 as an individual personality type with a positive and an inverse expression, ways that they can be productive in their roles in society as individuals, and ways that they can actually, go off the rails and be kind of a real piece of work to deal with. Anyway, my name is Shannon Douglas. This has just been a little quick rundown on how I see the court cards. This is an evolving study for me. And I think there are probably more levels and layers than the ones I'm looking at that are going to reveal themselves to me over time, as they may reveal themselves to you. I hope this was helpful. Love to hear your comments and meditations on this subject as well. Feel free to share the video, and I hope you have a super day. Take care.